Let's imagine for a second that it's the year 2025. The Middle East is caught in the crossfire of a direct war between Iran and Israel. And the fallout from this conflict? It's hitting every corner of the globe. Now, this isn't some far-off sci-fi plot. It's a real-world scenario that experts are grappling with as we speak.
Right, so let's just let that sink in for a moment. According to Emmett Magen over at Stanford, we're not just talking about another regional skirmish. He's making the case that this is a conflict so big it could completely shake up the global order. So, what on earth makes this potential war so incredibly significant?
And here is the twist in the story. The thing that makes this whole situation so fascinatingly complicated. These two nations, now mortal enemies, were actually once very close partners. I mean, allies, friends, even. Which brings us to the big question. What happened? How did we get from a tight-knit strategic alliance to the very edge of all-out war?
To really get our heads around how we got to this point, we've got to rewind the clock. Way back to a time when the relationship between Iran and Israel wasn't just different, it was the complete polar opposite of what we see today.
It's a pretty stunning fact when you hear it now. But yeah, right after Israel was formed, one of its earliest partners was Iran. And this wasn't about warm, fuzzy feelings. This was driven by cold, hard strategy. You see, both of them saw common enemies on the horizon, the growing influence of the Soviet Union and the pan-Arab nationalism being pushed by leaders like Egypt's Nasser.
For Israel, this became a cornerstone of its foreign policy. They called it the periphery doctrine. The whole idea was to build a network of friendly, non-Arab states on the edges of the region to balance out all the hostility right on its borders. And Iran, back then under the Shah, wasn't just part of this strategy, it was the absolute crown jewel.
And boy, did this partnership flourish. I mean, look at this. In the 50s, you had Iranian oil flowing directly to Israel, which was a critical lifeline against Arab boycotts. Then in the 60s, Israeli companies are in Iran building major projects, and you could literally hop on a direct flight between Tehran and Tel Aviv. It even got to the point of top-secret military projects, like Project Flower, where they were developing missile technology together. They were deeply, deeply connected.
And then it all came crashing down. In one single massive historical moment, everything shattered. This one event didn't just end the friendship, it slammed it into reverse, putting these two former allies on a collision course that's still playing out today.
You know, the speed of this change was just breathtaking. The 1979 Islamic Revolution, led by Ayatollah Khomeini, it wasn't a slow drifting apart. It was like a door being slammed shut and bolted. Strategic allies became sworn enemies seemingly overnight. The Israeli embassy in Tehran was literally handed over to the Palestinian Liberation Organization, and Israel was suddenly branded the Little Satan, a mortal enemy of Islam. The entire foundation of their relationship was just gone.
So, with open relations totally off the table, the conflict didn't just end. No, it just moved into the shadows. For more than 40 years, Iran and Israel had been locked in this covert war, a gritty, underground battle fought with spies, proxy armies, cyber attacks, and targeted assassinations.
Iran's playbook was all about building what experts call an axis of resistance. They funded and armed proxy groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Gaza, basically trying to encircle Israel in a ring of fire. Israel's response was just as secretive and deadly. We're talking about cyber attacks like the infamous Stuxnet virus that crippled Iran's nuclear centrifuges, and yes, assassinations of top Iranian nuclear scientists. This was a brutal, undeclared war.
Now, for decades, this shadow war had one huge, unwritten rule: avoid direct state-on-state attacks at all costs. But in 2024, that rule was shattered. An Israeli strike on an Iranian consulate in Syria led to something that had never happened before. Iran launched hundreds of missiles and drones directly at Israel. Just like that, the shadow war burst out into the open, and the dominoes started falling fast toward a full-blown war.
And that direct clash brings us right up to today. This whole thing is now about so much more than just two countries. As experts like Megan see it, what we're witnessing is a battle between two completely different visions for the future of the entire Middle East.
And the divide couldn't be more stark. On one side, you've got what's called the axis of stability. That's Israel, along with pragmatic Sunni Arab nations, all focused on economic growth, innovation, regional integration. Think of it as a push for a more modern, connected, tech-driven Middle East. But on the other side, you have the axis of resistance. It's led by Iran, and it's driven by a revolutionary anti-Western ideology with a very clear stated goal of tearing that other vision down and ultimately destroying Israel. These two futures just cannot coexist.
In this kind of super high-stakes environment, public opinion has become a massive force. And this is especially true inside Israel, where the sense of threat is really uniting the country.
Yeah, this data from the Israel Democracy Institute is just wild. 92% of Jewish Israelis support taking the fight directly to Iran. That is an unbelievably high number, way higher than for other recent wars. It really tells you that the public, after years of these proxy attacks, has come to see Iran and its nuclear ambitions as a genuine existential threat that has to be confronted head-on.
Meanwhile, over in Iran, the leadership is feeling its own kind of pressure. Expert Abbas Milani points out this really interesting shift. Ayatollah Khamenei, who usually pushes religious ideology over nationalism, is suddenly wrapping himself in the Iranian flag. In a single message, he used the word Iran more than 20 times. Now, this isn't just talk. It's a very strategic pivot to try and rally a population that might be divided, suggesting the regime knows it needs more than just ideology to get through a major war. So this all leads us to the most important question of all, right? Where does this go from here? What are the possible outcomes of this head-on collision? And what could it all mean for the future of the region?
Well, for Israel, the absolute worst-case scenario is a long, grinding war of attrition. A messy, drawn-out conflict that just bleeds its economy dry, causes endless suffering for its citizens, and in the end, just allows the Iranian regime to regroup and dig in for an even longer fight.
But there's another possibility. A quick, decisive Israeli victory could potentially shatter that axis of resistance. It could empower their rivals in the axis of stability, and, as some experts theorize, it might even trigger a crisis of legitimacy inside Iran itself, maybe even speeding up the collapse of the regime from within. That would truly create a new Middle East.
And this is where our story comes full circle. It seems almost impossible to even imagine right now, but when you look at their shared history, you have to ask, could these two nations ever find their way back from the brink and maybe even become partners again?
The key point that experts keep making is this: the conflict is with the regime, not with the Iranian people. In fact, many argue that Iranians and Israelis are actually natural friends in the Middle East. They're two major non-Arab powers, and they share a lot of strategic interests. The thinking goes that without the current ideology driving this fight, a powerful alliance of minorities could absolutely flourish again. And maybe that's the ultimate takeaway here. Abbas Milani leaves us with this final powerful thought, that the real answer to a nuclear crisis and a massive regional war might not be found on a battlefield at all, but in a fundamental political change inside Iran. It's a reminder that sometimes the most lasting solutions aren't military, but human.